Good evening. Welcome back to Parenting and Mental Health. My name is Dr. Court, and tonight we are going to continue talking about why sports are important for our youth to get involved in them, and also how to support our youth in sports properly according to the research. So last week we talked why sports are so important, some of the health epidemics of obesity, things that are happening, the top causes of death in our youth, and how so many of our youth suffer from mental health challenges, and how sports can help, not just mental, emotionally, and socially, but physically, academically, and all the way through their professional career. We also talked about how sports can help communities be stronger and healthier. The end, I finished by asking you, have I convinced you that sports are really important? It isn't necessarily that your child goes on to play sports throughout life as, a professional athlete. That's not the point. It's the point of getting them out there, getting them involved, and letting them enjoy the act of being part of sports. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about some ways that we can have our youth participate in sports better. So right now across the US, we have 45 million kids between 6 and 17 playing sports. 75% of those kids, by the time they reach 15, will drop out of playing sports. Part of this is caused by coaches not having training. Part of it is caused by other things. I'm not going to put all of this on the coaches. Part of this is caused by a lot of different things, by parents not receiving training on how to support their little youth athletes. Part of it is from undue or needed pressure. There is quite a great deal of attrition rates for youth sports. And when we looked at a survey, 30% of youth reported having negative interactions with coaches and parents as the reason they quit their sport. Without proper training, it's going to be more difficult to make sure that we are handling sports appropriately. And certainly we've seen in the news how coaches, parents have not handled coaching our student athletes well, and it ends up in the news, and we don't want that. We want our kids to get the most benefit from sports and not see the negative side of it. So we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. I have seen it in my own community where I offer to teach a workshop on how to properly support your student athlete. I work with some local colleges and universities on student athlete mental health. And in some cases, I've gotten feedback of the majority of our coaches or volunteers, we're never going to be able to get them to sit through a workshop to learn how to coach better. And that really, well, made me sad, because we can all be better in so many aspects of our lives. And I'm always trying to be better. I'm trying to be a better parent. I too coach, and I'm always trying to be a better coach. And I take several coaching courses through things like US Field Hockey, US Lacrosse, True Sport, so many others I have taken coaching seminars from, because I want to make sure that I'm doing this the right way, and that the experts in the field, the experts in sports psychology and in psychology and in pediatrics, are giving us all the information we need, as well as the researchers, what they're telling us, right? So when we interviewed, or when these researchers interviewed these kids, and they, 30% of them came back saying we had these negative interactions. And I even have it in my own family. My husband said he quit his college soccer team because his coach and he just really could not see eye to eye. My husband gets along with most people. So that was a shock, right? At the collegiate level, it happens too. And we're losing some amazing athletes. And hopefully they're not losing their love of being healthy and physically active. And that's what we want to keep, right? We want this longevity. Some of the things that came up when they were having these youth were having negative interactions. These athletes came back reporting saying they were called names by parents, by coaches. They had negative interactions, including being asked to cheat. They've seen parents fighting. I've heard about this from local referees. We've had referees ream out coaches and parents. So we've seen it all over the place. We've seen athletes report being pressured to play through injury. And I'm not talking about pro athletes. I'm talking about kids, right? 6 to 17, being pressured to play through injury. What are we really teaching them there? In the mental health field, I'm always trying to teach people about self-care. Well, what could be more self-care than allowing your body to heal after it's been injured? And sometimes parents and coaches don't have the skill set or know the techniques to teach the games properly. So then as these kids progress, they have to unlearn some things. So there are a lot of ways that we can improve making sports a positive interaction and allowing sports to help our health throughout life, but we've got to do it the right way. Participation in sport is widely believed to improve moral character, sportsmanship, improve teamwork, right? We talked about all these things before. Secondary gains come from the positive role models, all those good coaches and parents that have helped. I've had so many good coaches along the way, and it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about sports. And what we want to do is reduce those negative interactions. Sometimes it happens inadvertently, right? As parents, we get really excited, we put a little pressure on our kid, and we try and find that delicate balance of how to keep our kids playing and learning how to play through adversity, maybe not injury, but through adversity, right? We don't want, and I've had it happen with my kids, someone beats them in an exercise, oh, I'm not any good, so I don't want to play the sport anymore. How many of you had that happen? And it does happen. And so we have to learn, some of the things we can learn is how to find that balance and help talk your child, your youth through challenging themselves, finding it fun to challenge themselves, being able to work with people that are different than them, and why that's important. So we're going to talk through a lot of that stuff tonight. Some other statistics that I find important to share is that some other negatives that come out from, lack of training and so many other things is these are the things we want to reduce. So 3.5 million kids under the age of 14 have sports-related injuries that send them to the emergency room. 67% of those injuries happen during practice. And even though we know that, most coaches and parents are more lax about safety procedures during practice than during games. And so knowing this information, maybe that's going to make us tighten the ship up a little bit during practice to make sure that kids are paying attention to safety so they don't end up in the emergency room. 51% of these injuries come from overuse. And we're going to talk a lot more about overuse tonight and specialization in the sport, when it's a good thing and when it isn't. So let's talk a little bit more about overuse or preventing overuse injuries. We need to find balance for us as parents or as coaches. We want to find that balance of playing sports safely and allowing them to be challenged in their sport, but also not specializing so much that they start to have injuries that really shouldn't be happening to kids that aren't even fully developed yet. So the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests taking 1 to 2 days per week off per sport, only playing one team sport per season. I know that's hard in areas where club sports are becoming the norm. And if you don't get on a club sport, then you're not getting the proper recognition, or it's harder to make the club sport later. I understand all of that. And we can only change that as a community. And the more of us that get on board to say, no, my child doesn't need to play, doesn't need to swim year round or do gymnastics year round while playing soccer and softball or baseball, they can maybe play one thing for fun and one thing else. Or limiting how many sports they play per season. I also understand growing up in an area where there weren't a lot of diversity of sports, wanting my kids to try it all. So one way to deal with that, and we'll talk more about this later, is allowing your kids to go to different sports camps. That gives them a chance to spend a week focusing on one sport and seeing if they like it or not. And if they don't like it, okay. Most of the time, more often than not, the some of the coaches in the sports camps have been trained. So that's helpful too. You're getting coaches that are more highly trained than maybe the rec league volunteer parents. And so your kids really get a good experience to learn some fundamentals and see if it's something they really want to do. Some things that we recommend is to think about what your goals as a family are and what your goals are for your kids in sports. Is it to achieve elite status or to get a college scholarship? We'll get into why that might not be the best goal you could set for your youth. Okay. Do you aim to eat dinner tonight together most nights as a family? Do you encourage learning over all else, or is fun a big part of your family dynamic? Understanding what your family dynamic is about can really help you decide how to make these decisions about sports and where they are appropriate to play more and when it isn't, and helping you find that balance. In general, they say, not playing the organized sport for more hours a week than your child's age. So not spending more than 12 hours a week playing a sport if your child is 12 and going down from there. So that's a helpful number to follow that kind of helps you have the ability to change a little bit as your child gets older and they're more able to handle more time playing with the sport. Now, that said, if on your own, you're kicking your kid outside so they get off a screen, because that's something that parents that we really struggle with these days, right? Is keeping our kids off screens. If they go outside and they choose to pick up a soccer ball or pick up a basketball and just do that for a little while, then that's fine. They're doing that on their own and they're doing that because it's fun. And that's a really important part of this. So let's talk about specialization. I want to put out some stats here to help parents understand, because I've seen this as a coach, I've seen it as a parent, I've seen it as an athlete, where I've seen athletes that have quit once they get to the college level because they're burned out. I've seen it happen. I've talked to parents as a high school coach when I've been a high school coach in the past, and I've coached at all levels. I've coached collegiately, high school, middle, and elementary school. And I had parents in high school say, oh, well, we really want to push our child because we want them to get a D1 scholarship. This was a child that was getting straight A's. So as a coach and a teacher at that school at the time, I kind of, as kindly as I could, I said, well, maybe you should focus on your child getting an academic scholarship because they can. They have really high test scores. They're amazingly smart. And if they happen to get an athletic scholarship, great. But, focus on the thing that they can take throughout life. And sometimes that's received well, sometimes it's not. It's fun to try and go for that, but recognize that it's only 2% of kids that play high school sports that go on to play college sports. So despite this knowledge, we still have this intensity and this desire to specialize earlier and earlier. It might be because we hear these amazing stories of Olympians who started ice skating at 3, or, the story of Tiger Woods picking up golf at 3, and they went on to be elite. And what I would say to you is those aren't the norm. Those are the outliers. They're the anomalies, and people can still be great. You can take Alex Morgan as an example. She's on the US soccer team. She didn't start playing soccer until 10 or 12, I think is what the answer. And please correct me if you know the exact age, but I know it was later than most. And she went on to be elite. So she, the norm isn't always what we hear these stories for. And just recognize that most of our kids, as the NCAA loves to put in their commercials, are going to go pro in something other than sports. And that's just talking about the collegiate athletes. It's going to be even more of our kids at the youth age. So as parents, we want to encourage the aspects of sports that help support health, whether it be mental, emotional, social, or physical, and use the aspects of sports that help them to be the best person they can be in many aspects of their life. So I put all these little stats out here just to share so that you can see how rare it is to have this happen. You can see, out of the 8,000 draft eligible in baseball, 791 were actually drafted, right? And draft eligible, we're not even talking about our youth yet. So it's pretty rare. And so we really want to try to help encourage our youth to continue to play the sport. And part of that's going to come from both extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. And we want to make sure that we're not unrealistically putting goals on our kids at a young age. By the time they're in junior, senior in high school and they're excelling at it, yes, start thinking about college scholarships and all the things that go along with it, the videos and all of the things that you need to do, the overnight visits and things. Until then, to get them there, if they want to, they have to be having fun and they have to enjoy it. So we want to make sure that given the degree to which children change in their physical, psychological, emotional, cognitive demands from childhood to youth, they're going to change a lot. Their bodies are going to change. We see kids that are, the tallest in their class when they're in the 4th or 5th grade and end up being one of the shortest by the time they're a senior in high school, or vice versa. So a lot changes in our youth between when they're 6 and when they're 16. So we want to try and taper our demands on specialization. And in fact, some of the downsides of specialization that happens more often than not, that we get more sports related injury, right? The overuse of a certain part of the body, peer isolation. They only start hanging out with certain kids and they don't get to hang out with a diversity of kids, not all the kids that play on their baseball team, or, we get to see kids that do other things. They can develop psychosocial problems, basically coming from specialization and that pressure that comes not just from the coach, but also from the parents of feeling that they have to excel, which also promotes this sense of perfectionism. And as I've said in many of my sessions before, perfect is an illusion. Diamonds are worth a lot because they're imperfect. And what's worth less is a cubic zirconium, which is a synthetically made diamond. And it's perfect as far as the angles go, right? But the imperfect, real diamond is what's valued. None of us are perfect. And the sooner our kids learn that and they can embrace their strengths along with their weaknesses and work on all of it and see the strengths and weaknesses in others and how to work together, they are going to be stronger for it. And that's one thing that I love about sports. You do get to see so many different strengths and how to work together. And in that, and how to conquer adversity, right? How to use failure as a learning experience. However, sometimes when we specialize, we put all of our eggs in one basket. And then when the child fails, or they don't do well, or they lose a game, or they join a club team, the club team isn't excelling, they feel like a failure. And we want to avoid that because we want them to keep the love of the game so they continue to push through the tough times, which is the learning how to get better, right? I can tell you of many star middle school athletes that I have seen that have dropped out by the time they're in high school, or like I said, the high school All-Americans that quit the second they're out of their parents' house and in college because they don't want to play and then deal with the aftermath of losing a scholarship or, having issues with their parents. It becomes pretty intense. And we have so many studies that show that athletic performance at an early age is unreliable in predicting the future ability to perform successfully in a chosen sport. So despite all of this, we still continue to specialize. The earlier a young athlete's identified as having talent, the more uncertain the prediction of their future success is. Young athletes feel pressure to succeed or at risk of struggling with the shame when they don't live up to these expectations. And really, we want our child to succeed. I've seen it in my own kids when I've seen them on the sports field and they're not getting a particular skill, or they didn't hear the advice that I gave them because I have played sports, right? And I know how that sometimes feels disappointing. However, we have to remember that they have to find their own way. And sometimes what they're going to be good at isn't what we were good at, or they're not going to excel or learn from all of the mistakes that we made. We have to let them find their own way, and we have to be supportive of them. So just some more to talk about specialization and give you the numbers. I know this is kind of hard to read, but I wanted to post this. This is from the NCAA. And I just, I say that, only 90%, 98% go onto collegiate sports. If you look at this, when it was something other than 2% of youth athletes that went on to play, high school athletes actually, that went on to play collegiate sports, they were super niche sports. So women's ice hockey, for instance, has a really high number because there aren't very many states in the US that have women's ice hockey. I know when I grew up in Maryland. I really wanted to play ice hockey because my whole family came from New England. I thought it was amazing. It was field hockey, but I was actually allowed to run into people. So that was amazing to me. But there was no women's ice hockey in Maryland. The closest was Delaware, and it was a men's ice hockey team at the time. I know a lot has changed, but not that much. So to give you, so if someone's like, oh, well, I see a 28% or 26%, that's when you get to the sports that you're only pulling from a couple states. So the couple states that do have high school women's ice hockey, then those colleges are going to be pulling from those states. So that's why some of them, but you can look at the numbers of how many participants there are, and then come over to here and see across the board. You'll just see again and again, 1% in basketball, 1.8% in cross country. And it just continues down the range, 2.7% in water polo. Water polo is a little more of a unique high school sport, right? So the numbers are there. I'm not making this up. Does this mean just because the kids' chances to play in college are low, does this mean they shouldn't play sports? No, absolutely play, but don't play with the outcome and the goal that I want my kid to play in college, or that this is going to be my kid's ticket to a free college experience. Have them play sports so they perform better academically, which is in the research, right? Regular exercise actually improves our brain function, and then use that brain function to get good grades, and use those good grades to get into school, right? Use all of those thinking skills and those problem solving skills that you learn from sports in youth, and all those social skills you learn from learning how to play with different kids, and use that to find success later in life in something probably other than sports. That doesn't mean you have to stop playing. You can keep playing. I'm still playing sports, and I love it. And I love every moment that I play. So some of this specialization came out of Erickson's studies, that deliberate practice emphasized this 10,000 hours rule. And it was necessary to achieve a level of excellence. While this is true, some more recent research has become a little bit more specific about it. It's not just 10,000 hours. It's 10,000 very deliberate hours of learning, right? Of practice, of learning, of repetition. That if you do that and have a love of the sport, you will continue to have this motivation to keep playing. But if in the push to get those 10,000 hours, because you start young and you keep getting pushed to play, you lose love of the sport, the likelihood that your child will continue to play is pretty low. And a lot of the kids that end up in my office are, some of them are ones that have dropped out of sport, and they talk about the pressure that they've got. And it's hard sometimes for kids to pick and choose. They want to play all the sports. I'm the first to admit, this spring, I definitely overcommitted my kids because they asked to play all these different sports. So we're trying it out. And I try my best not to have them go to more than one sport a day, right? And so we do one, and then if that means we miss a practice for something else, I talk with the coach and I see if that's okay. And if it's not, then I'll send them to camp that summer. They can test out the sport and see if they like it. So we have to find the right compromise for our kids, and we want to lead with what they're excited about and what they love. In the literature, again, we already talked about the identification of talent early on, and one of the other key components is the love of the sport. If your kid loves the sport, you're not going to have to tell them to go out and shoot 200 times to get better. They'll do it on their own. and they'll have motivations all on their own, and their motivation will persist even when things aren't going well because they love the sport. They will push to get better. They will push to find other kids that make them better because they love it. And that is absolutely something we see across the studies. There were some studies that looked at organized sports programs in the Soviet Union, who's perennially been a sports powerhouse in the Olympics, right? And they showed the athletic advantages did not stem from specialization at an early age, but instead from diversification. And because of the concerns about the health and the well-being of the youth athletes, as I mentioned before, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not recommend specialization before 12 to 13 years of age. So we want to pay attention to that. So now let's talk about the difference between specialization and diversification. Again, the level of competitiveness in sports and playing sports at an advanced level continues to rise, especially as we get more awareness and access to different sports. Younger and younger ages are trying to specialize. Seasons are getting longer. More club teams are popping up for sports that play year round. The kids have to try out to make the team, and parents are encouraging them to do this. And that can be fine as long as we're really paying attention to that balance. In fact, youth participation in sports has increased from approximately 18 million, and I think I quoted earlier 45 million. And so it keeps growing. Although more children are playing sports, the multi-sport athlete is starting to disappear. And this raises the question about diversification in the development of youth athletes. Intense year-round training in a specific sport, as we talked about before, and the exclusion of other sports can lead to increased injury risk, all those other issues. Diversification, on the other hand, can actually increase cognitive development because you're challenging the brain. When you play different sports, your brain has to problem solve differently. It improves coordination because you're using different muscle sets and different patterns of muscle movement. It increases strength because, again, you're using different muscles. You see a lot now. We didn't used to see it in pro sports. They used to really specialize, where you see now football players doing things like yoga. Yoga isn't just stretching, it's strength building. And you see other athletes getting into pools and going swimming because it supports different muscles. And you're doing that because no muscle works by itself. It works with all the other muscles around it. In fact, am dealing with a shoulder injury right now, and my physical therapists are not focusing on the injured muscle, but in fact, strengthening all the other muscles around that muscle so that when I do get this muscle repaired, this injury repaired, everything around it's there to support it better so it doesn't get injured again. Diversification obviously helps decrease sports injuries. And diversification, this is important, as we point out with the Soviet Union study, does not decrease the ability for someone to become an elite athlete. I want you to pay attention, especially this fall during the NFL season, or during the collegiate football season. You will often hear about certain players who were also a star basketball player, right? And they waited till college just to play the one sport. I hear it a lot. You'll hear about a wide receiver being a college basketball player or a baseball player, and they were excellent in that sport too. And just listen for that. You'll be surprised how often you do hear about it. In fact, kids who diversify in sports are actually more likely to reach that elite status, and they're more likely to continue playing sports and be active their whole life. So that's good too, right? Even if they don't play in college, they will keep playing sports because it's fun, because they got something out of it. It felt good to them. They're healthy. So let's talk about what youth say about sports, because there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we think youth want in sports, and this goes back to the training, and what youth are actually saying. So According to the fundamentals of physical, psychological, and cognitive development, right? And what we hear from the American Academy of Pediatrics and so many other well-respected entities, we want a child to be at least 6 years old before they start competing in competitive organized sports. Now, does that mean they can't do soccer shots? No, soccer shots isn't competitive. They're just kicking a ball around, they're learning some skills, they're hanging out with friends. Great. No problem there, right? But when you start pushing, whether they won or lost, what their stats were, we don't want to start doing that younger than 6. Cognitively, that is something that the concept doesn't really work as well. And for the kids that it does, it will often manifest in this sense of needing to be perfect. I have definitely coached those kids where we weren't keeping score and they would walk off the field devastated, even after they've played a great game, because they paid attention to how many goals were scored instead of whether they had fun or not. Some kids are that intense, and that's fine. Just find the balance between saying, hey, okay, well, you scored one less goal than the other team. Well, what did you learn from that game? Right? What did you learn from it? What parts of it were fun? And keep re-encouraging that. And the learning part is that skill readiness balance. We want to continue to encourage kids to push just a little bit beyond their skill in order for them to be wanting to do something that's challenging. It's going to need to be fun. And making sure we accurately assess each child's individual sports readiness, even if they can start playing lacrosse at 5. Well, when you go out and you try and teach them, are they willing to listen to all the skills that need to be developed to play that sport? Some sports are more intricate in their skill sets and take longer to learn. So those are probably the sports you want to wait to your child to be a little bit older. Soccer, at least the basic skills of just kicking a ball, right? The basic skill. I am not putting soccer can be extremely complex. That is not what I'm saying, but kids can start earlier because most kids can just run into a ball and it moves and they feel successful, right? You try and teach a kid how to catch a ball with a lacrosse stick, that's a much more complicated skill and it can really hurt if it hits them in the face. So we might want to wait for that one to be a little bit older, right? Or water polo. You need to learn how to swim before you can swim around in the pool, throwing this ball and trying to shoot on a goal. So there are certain sports that we might want to wait until a little bit older to make sure that they have the coordination and the readiness to participate in the sport. If we don't do that, we often ruin the sport for the kid. I can tell you personally, I did this with my own family. Without getting into too many details, I put my son in a sport too early. And now one of my most beloved sports my son doesn't like, mostly because he didn't get a chance to be successful. And he was with a group of people that he didn't really get along, didn't know. It felt like an outsider, didn't feel very good, and it lessened his confidence. That was the opposite of what I was trying to do with the sport. So we want to pay attention. And when there's a mismatch, we need to be ready to pull back from the sport. Because if there is a mismatch, it can cause anxiety, it can cause stress, it can reduce their confidence, and can cause attrition, right? What we want to do, or cause injury, what we want to do is make sure they're ready for it. When young athletes were actually surveyed as to what their goals for participation in sport were, the number one thing they said was fun. I know you've heard me say it over and over again, and I sometimes forget as a coach because I'm competitive and I want my kids to win. I want them to get better. I always have to check back in and go, okay, are we having fun? Like, it is fun to get better and it is fun to win. And for younger kids, though, it's also fun to be with their friends and to run around and play tag. So the more you can gamify skills in the sports setting, that will make them feel better about it. That will make them enjoy it more. So you can, and most, US entities of certain sports, certainly the US Federation of Soccer, US Lacrosse, US Field Hockey, Little League, AAU sports, they all have different programs online where you can look up and you can find the fundamentals. So finding fun activities you can do with them that make learning the fundamentals fun, because they're kids, right? We want them to still be a kid. And that will help them way more psychologically and physically than the kid that says they're not having fun, they pout, and then they sit on the sideline for the rest of practice. They're not getting all that exercise. That's the whole point, right? Or that socialization, or learning how to push through something that's a little challenging. So we asked kids also what it meant to have fun. And what kids said was the participation and the being with their friends. That was what fun was defined as for them. And the other things they said that all came above winning was fun. It was the feeling of something being fair, learning, and being with friends. All came above winning. So I know that's surprising for a lot of our competitive parents out there, that winning isn't everything. For kids, it isn't. So we want to make sure that we're providing fair environments, right? That we set the rules out. I often talk about this with my adults in my office clinically about setting clear boundaries. And I use sports as a metaphor. You walk out on the field, if you know the rules, you can confidently navigate the rules, right? You know, when you get called out for something, you know what the consequence is. How wonderful of a metaphor of life is that, right? And you have a goal, you have a common goal with a group of people, and you're taught how to agree to that, okay, and how to achieve it. So many great lessons from sports, but we have to approach it from the aspect of how a kid sees it so that they do continue playing sports longer and they do fall in love with sports. One way to do this is we have to work on using the language of growth or growth mindset. Carol Dweck is hands down the expert in this field. And if you get her book, Growth Mindset, it's a great book. You can also get it on Audible. She is just an amazing academic in this field and has so many great things to learn from growth mindset. It is teaching kids, if a weight's too heavy to lift by yourself, you figure out how you can use a team to lift it together, right? That can teach growth mindset. How to help work as a team to coordinate to make an effort of win. The initial language of growth versus fixed mindset is pretty simple. It's the difference between I am doing well at a sport, or I am really learning how to become an athlete versus I'm athletic, right? When you say I'm athletic, it's as if it's a skill that was imposed upon you from the gods, right? You were born with athleticism. What we're learning is that's not necessarily true. More and more, we're realizing our brains and our bodies are highly plastic, meaning they can change. We can learn whatever we set our mind to. So changing our language from giving someone a character trait, like you are smart, you are athletic, you are fast, and changing it to, wow, you've really worked at being faster. And wow, you really put in the work that it takes to do well in this sport or to do well in this class. Doing that is going to help your kids. Just changing your language slightly is going to help when the child doesn't do well. They can more clearly recognize that it doesn't take away from their identity. I see this one kid in one of the youth teams that I watch, very tall, athletic kid, but still young. And he really loves the sport he's playing. And his parents put a lot of pressure on him and tell him he's athletic and he's good. They don't put any emphasis on you work to be good, or being good is something that can come and go, and you want to use your teammates to help grow. Your teammates have something to teach you. You have additional skills to learn. The kid with the growth mindset is a coach's dream because they're always going to listen and want to learn. The kid with the fixed mindset is the kid that thinks they know how to play and they say, I'm awesome at this. They're also the kid that when they lose, have a breakdown. They're also the kid that has high anxiety, that struggles with perfectionism and depression, because when they don't do well, they don't know how to handle the failure. So use things like learning experiences versus failing, putting time and effort in, finding strengths, seeking strengths in others that help you be better, using visualization. So you can visualize if you don't know how to do something yet, maybe watch it, an elite athlete do it, but then come back and say, okay, close your eyes and picture yourself shooting on goal, or picture yourself taking the ball away from the other team or causing a turnover. You can do that. And if you make learning about the sport the fun part, your youth will take that and run with it. And then as a coach, that's my favorite kid to coach, because I can teach them something and they're eager to learn and they get excited to get better. Some 3 words that I found, as I loved this, 3 words that you can use for school age kids: compete, learn, and honor. So this goes along with the growth mindset. When we say compete, it means effort and energy. You're giving it your all, and you're giving your full attention and effort, and you're putting all your energy into it while you're doing it. We talk about learn. We talk about having a learner's mindset, which means both being humble and knowing that you always have something to learn. Even Messi has things to learn, or, a Steph Curry has things to learn, right? They spend their off season trying to learn more, whether it's about how the other teams they play against and how they can manipulate their weaknesses, or about themselves, right? Being open to new ideas and concepts and being curious. The elite athletes that stay in athletics the longest are doing these things. They don't stop and say, I'm the best, and just sit and rest on their laurels. They keep trying to learn. They keep putting in the effort and energy because they love the game. They love the sport. And honor, that means the game's bigger than me. Yes, it's just a game. And it really is, but it doesn't mean it can't be a passion. I'm passionate about sports as much as I am about health, as much as I am about parenting. And I recognize in all those things, it's bigger than me. So letting the child know that they are not the only person on the team. There are other children on the team that carry the same burden and weight. It's also, when they make a mistake, other kids make mistakes too. It's also not about, when you're wearing your uniform, you're representing your community or your club. That's important to know, so they know that's a way that they behave, right? That they're representing a group that's bigger than them. And I saw this quote and I really took to it. Winning is not your child's, yours, or in your coach's control. It's merely a byproduct of competing, learning, and honoring the sport. If your child does these things and you kind of really put this out there for your child, then instill this in your child, then winning will come as a byproduct. I think right now, again, we're still in March Madness. A great example of watching teams that maybe lost their conference, but they're still in March Madness. Sometimes those teams that lose their conference and don't become conference champions go further than the conference champion in the playoff. Why is that? Well, they put the effort and energy in, they learned from their mistakes, they never gave up, and they realized it's bigger than the one person. Each player realizes it's bigger than them. They have to make sure that they're putting the effort and energy because their teammate depends on them. And another great lesson in life, right? So part of that will help with that. This is actually a leadership model. It's the Hershey Blanchard situational leadership model. And I brought this up because in order to help youth create agency, which means helping them develop individuality, which is developmentally happening between 6 and 17. Between 6 and 12, they still depend a lot on their parents and those that they look up to as part of what they believe in, as part of what they follow as a rule. And then when they get to adolescence and teenage years, it's some of the reasons why it becomes so difficult as parents is they start to individualize. They align a little bit more with their peers and they start to find out who they are themselves. This happens on the sports field too, and we have to alter the way we work with them as the child gets older. So when they're younger, telling them exactly what they need to do. And as a coach, I can tell you, don't just yell their name. Say, hey, Robert, you've got to run through after you pass the ball. You've got to run to space, or you've got to pass the ball to where you want your player to be, not where they are, right? When you say their name, don't just say their name, because ultimately that's going to create anxiety in the child and they don't know what to do and they'll freeze And then they're definitely not doing what you want as a coach. So instead, come up with quick phrases that you can tell your kids and practice them in practice. Go through, skip pass, right? Set a pick. I'm trying to think of these off the cuff. This is not part of the script, so sorry if I'm not catching all the different sports. But when you're doing that and you can give them quick phrases that they can hear while they're playing, that will help direct them. And that's more appropriate when they're younger, right? You'll notice when you watch FIFA World Cup, coaches actually don't coach, right? The game starts, they sit back and they watch and they put in subs, but that's all predetermined because at that level, the coach has taught the players what they need to teach. They have worked together and now it's up to them. And so that's when you get to this, delegating. It's a highly developed player. When a player's still developing and they're younger, you're going to do more directing and then a little bit more coaching, right? And then we get to supporting. So this might be like the college level player where you're doing more supporting and encouraging their confidence, or the high level high school athlete. And eventually you get to delegating. And yes, there might be microcosms of this at earlier stages. And I want you just to pay attention. If you use this model as both a coach and as a parent, right? So sometimes as a parent, it's good to direct, it's help them, but make sure you're aligning with what the coach is talking about too, so that you're giving the child the same message. If you disagree with what the coach is, go talk to the coach, ask them why they've decided to run this or that. And as a coach, take it as an open and honest discussion. This will help the kids not have to pick between their coach or their parent. And instead, they'll be getting a consistent message across the board. So all of these things that help create agency, you want to talk about something called locus of control. And I remind this to my clients every day and to my kids all the time. The only thing that you have control over is your own behavior. Your emotions are going to come and go, and how you react to them is what's under your control. You cannot control your friends, your family. You can't control the other team or the refs, no matter what you say or do. You may try and influence, and you can have influence over people, but the influence comes from your behavior. And that's what locus of control is all about. And the research shows the further outside of your own behaviors that you try and control, the more anxiety and depression and physical ailments develop. So stay within that and remind your kids all the time, like, hey, you know what? You can't control what the ref's going to call. We just have to operate within what happens, right? That's also a growth mindset, right? It's operating with what happens and moving with it, being flexible. Facilitate goal setting, not set goals. Notice I said facilitate goals. So for the younger kids, yeah, set goals for them. Say like, hey, today I want you to try and do this. As they get older, right, you start to get into that like 11, 12, 13 age, you can start facilitating goal setting and say, hey, what do you think you can set a goal for today? I did that with my son. His job was to cause 3 turnovers during the game. It's like, great, awesome. He was so excited when he finished the game because he had done it. I didn't choose the goal for him. I let him choose it. And we talked through it. First couple times, you might have to throw a couple ideas out there or talk about the goals you set for yourself when you were playing sports, or, even make a game of it with pro sports when you're watching a pro sports game or an elite game. Like, okay, how many points do you think so-and-so is going to score? Or how many block shots do you think so-and-so is going to have? Or, how many takeaways or cause turnovers? Or what time do you think this athlete's going to run this in or swim this in? All of these things, right? You can kind of play around and make it fun. Again, gamify the game, and that makes it more fun. Include your athletes in the decisions. There are some things that you can let kids choose as a coach, as a parent. It comes down to them choosing their equipment. Let them choose what cleats they get. Who cares if they're purple instead of green or black, right? As long as it doesn't break a rule for the league they're playing in. As a coach, if you want to teach a skill, maybe give them a choice between learning this skill or that skill. If they need to learn both, does it really matter which one they do that day? Talk to the athletes about privileges versus rights. So a child has a right to their own body, their own space, always, right? Make sure they know that. So when someone puts them in danger or makes them feel uncomfortable, that is something they need to tell someone about. And this gets into safety. And then you can also remind kids, for most sports in most areas, it's a privilege to play on the team. And at any point, if they aren't honoring the rules, and coaches need to set rules out, if they're not honoring the rules, they can be removed from the team. And this is important to tell both coaches and parents need to follow rules too. And the coach, the more that's put out there and communicated, the more cohesive the parents, coaches, and players are going to be. When we don't follow the rules, consequences, right? Like removal from the team or missing a game. Even if you know you might lose the game because your three best players did something they weren't supposed to, you gotta honor those consequences because that gives you integrity. And integrity is a life skill that will serve them way beyond that one game. Two-way feedback. So we give a lot of feedback as coaches and parents. Allow your kids to give feedback too. I did this to my daughter the last couple of years. I gave her the option as to whether mommy was going to coach her team or not. I had gotten to the point where I realized there were other people that were highly competent, could coach, and I didn't feel that I felt like I had done my duty. And I said, do you want mommy to coach or not? And I was, to my surprise, she said yes. She really wanted me to coach. You know what? That made us both feel good. I did something she wanted, and I knew she liked me coaching. So that was a chance for us to bond. So these are just all some suggestions on how we can turn some things about sports. Sports have so many inherent amazing qualities that help us be healthy throughout life, that reduce mental, physical, emotional trauma. And there are a lot of things that happen with sports that can be bad, but we can avoid it through making sure we keep a growth and a learner's mindset, and we find ways to learn how to be better. So I hope this was helpful for parents and coaches out there tonight, trying to learn how we can navigate this delicate balance of pushing our players while also honoring our youth. That the main goal for them, remember, is fairness, fun, participation with their friends, right? And learning how to be fair is a really important life lesson. Learning how to have fun when so many things are getting so much more serious for them as they become an adult. That's a self-care technique. If you can have fun, even in the face of stress, you're going to be more resilient in life. So let them have fun. Let them know that they're allowed to. I hope this was fun for you tonight. It was fun for me to talk about it. I'll see you again next week for parenting and mental health. Please post topics and questions in Facebook, and I will get to them as I can. All right, have a great night.